You would think that with the sheer volume of blown up Ecoboost engines I've torn down on this channel, that I would have covered all of them, but that simply isn't the case. So I went out of my way to scratch another one off the list, and today we're going to tear down a second generation 3.5 liter Ecoboost V6 out of a 2019 F-150. Now I know this is going to be a huge letdown, but I would be lying if I told you the miles on this engine because I simply don't know. There's too many hands, too many steps in the process for me to get this particular engine, for me to find out the miles. I don't know. There's no VIN number on the engine. A lot of Hondas and a lot of Korean engines have the VIN number on them. I can do a Carfax, and then I can give you a close estimate. But in this case, it's a 4 or 5 year old engine. That's my best guess. So if you figure average miles, 15 to 20,000 miles a year, this has, what, 80,000 miles, 90, maybe 100,000, but it could be an exception. I've seen lots of super high mileage 3 and 4 year old vehicles, and we simply don't know. When I say second generation, that means this is the second iteration of the 3.5 liter Ecoboost. First generation, 2011 through 2017. Second gen came out in 2018. These engines make 375 horsepower and 470 foot-pounds of torque. It's a lot of power out of a V6. Turbos or not, that's a lot of power. And I have heard that Ford fixed a lot of the issues that the first generation had on these engines, but I've also heard that these engines can still fail. Obviously, this one is on the stand for a reason, and they're also really expensive, and usually that's for a reason. Another thing I don't know about this engine is what's wrong with it or if it turns over. Obviously, I have some idea that it turns over because the flex plate did not have a torque converter on it still. So I think it's going to turn over, but we don't know. That doesn't feel good. That's a lot of pressure. Not compression tight. Ooh, that's tight. That takes a lot of force, and these aren't that high a compression. Let's see if I can feel anything loose in here. Uh-oh. Rodney, is that you? Have you left? The next thing I'd like to do is pull the plugs. First, we have to pull the coils. What kind of magic sauce is... The first thing I noticed, the spark plugs have a painted tip, which means these are likely the original spark plugs from this engine. And I think the factory interval suggests 100,000 miles, although a lot of people changed them before that. And the plugs don't look great. Pretty dark and dingy. But they're not bent, and they all look the same, which means that the likelihood of some malice in the combustion palace is pretty low. That doesn't mean it can't happen. It just means that we'll have to dig a little deeper before we find problems. Now I'm going to take a minute and remove the wiring harness from this engine. And the harness is off. Next, we'll pull the upper intake manifold. Well, that was simple. As you can see, the intake manifold bolts to the valve covers. Valve covers have intake ports on them, much like the same generation 2.7. So the next thing we're going to do is remove the high pressure fuel pump. We'll have to pull this line off, then we can get the valve covers off. Maybe we'll take it off over here. Ooh, that had some pressure in it still. Oh, we're leaking fuel. Oh, that was straight gas. Now we can pull the pump. Pump's off. Next, we'll start with this valve cover to the right-hand side. I'm not sure if that's all of them, but I think that is. Something has happened in here. Somebody's been in here mucking around. The very first thing I noticed, improper tool marks on the camshafts. There's not a place to put anything here. Why would you do this? There is, however, a place to put a wrench here, which there's also some marks here, but they're not as bad as this. Looks like somebody used a pair of channel locks. Why would you work on a vehicle this way? And aside from that, I don't really see anything too terrible. All the rockers are in place. Chain seems to have decent tension. The phasers, which never, ever, ever fail. I'm kidding. Those look to be intact, at least from what I can tell. Now we're moving on to the left side. First thing I need to do is pull a dipstick. It's pretty easy when there's not a tube. Looks dry to me. Now I need to remove this engine hook. And now I can remove the valve cover. Well, we have a signature from the same amateur mechanic on the camshafts on this bank. I just don't know why that was the area of the cam you want to grab when this is clearly where you put a tool to hold them. It just tells us that this has been into before, which is not a surprise. And I wonder if it was to replace these phasers. One major advantage to the second generation 3.5 liter Ecoboost is the addition of port injection. It keeps the intake ports and the intake valves a lot cleaner than if it were just direct injected. However, I can't really show you what the intake valves look like because of the angle of the ports. Really don't lend themselves to being able to see down them with a camera. I'm sorry guys, wish there was another way. One thing I am going to do is remove the variable valve timing solenoids because a lot of times if there's metal in the oiling system, these will pick it up. So when I first pulled these out, I thought they were pretty clean, but look at all that. That's metal. That's bad. Real bad. The other side, not a lot. I mean, I take that back. So we're going to have some problems in here. We're not taking apart a good engine today. And the next thing I'm going to do is start cleaning the front cover off. We're going to remove this pump, this plastic thermostat housing, and water outlet. Why does that not work? Well, that was simple. Now we'll move on to the water pump. I don't know, are there any bolts behind this thing? Let's pry on it and find out. I feel like there isn't. Oh yeah. Should come right off. What have we here? A little bit of corrosion in here, but that doesn't really affect the actual water pump itself. Impeller looks good. No marks from the impeller hitting the timing cover. The gasket looks pretty bad, but that's easily replaced. This is a good unit. Next, a belt tensioner. And the idler. And finally, the crank pulley. You think this one will do it? We'll find out. Oh, that's not good. I see whoever installed this crank seal was also the person that used a pipe wrench on the camshafts. Yikes. Next, we're going to tickle the timing cover and get a few of these bolts out. All right, did I miss any? I think I got them all. Now, do these have a threaded boss to pull themselves off with? Some of them do. You'll be able to tell they'll be one of these bosses will be threaded, but I don't see that on this. Maybe I'm just missing it. So we're going to just start prying on stuff. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. Oh, it might not be fine. This is tough. Got all the bolts out, right? Oh yeah, she'll come off. I think we're ready to pull this cover off. Holy moly. Oh yeah, somebody's been in here before. It's got whiz wheel marks all over the place. Wow. And that seal is gone. Spring's broken. 2 different colors of RTV or sealant. Well, let's take a look. So we can see that there's some forbidden glitter in the oil pan. That's never a good thing. I looked a little closer and I looked at the date code on this rail right here, and it's from 21, which means this has had a timing set put in it. And that is already broken. I don't know if that's user error or if that's install error, or they're just very bad parts. I would tend to think that they would last longer than that. But aside from, the forbidden glitter and the broken timing guide that have been already replaced, it looks great. Now I'm going to turn this engine over, see if we can line up the timing marks, see if it's in time. This is a big if. Oh, that sounded terrible. Let's keep going. Uh-oh. Bad stuff has happened. No, we'll just power through it. It got really tough for a minute, and there's no plugs in this. This should turn over a lot easier. I'm just looking for the links. There we go. These links here. Well, we got some loose stuff in there. What we're looking for is right about there. So first things first, for those wondering, these are the old cam phaser design. The new ones have a cover on the spring. Springs are not exposed. This looks like it's in time to me. That's lined up. That's lined up. That looks lined up to me. Timing marks on that cam gear. You can see the different color links. I think this engine is in time. All right, now it's time to peel all the timing system off. We'll start with the tensioner. I don't think these have a lot of power behind them. Famous last words. Wait, why did water come out of that? That's not where water goes. That's bad. You're not supposed to have that. Does this rail come off pretty easy? Nope. Let's take this one off next. Oh, that's shattered. That rail is shattered right there as well. I didn't even have to take that one out. This poor guide. And there's just water everywhere. Maybe this core was left outside, but I didn't see any way for water to get into it. Not in the oiling system. Yeah, that looks decent. I guess I do have to take this off. Well, there's one chain. Decent. Onto the other bank. There's no water in that one. That rail looks pretty decent. That rail is unbroken. Another nice chain. At this point, it's time to cram the cam caps off. Well, at first glance, it doesn't look too bad, but that second glance, that's what gets you. The rockers all look pretty decent. They all seem to roll well. Nothing's out of place. Some of these journals aren't too bad, but of course, the head journals usually are in better shape than the caps. You can definitely tell there's some non-oil substance in here. The camshafts, they're not terrible. Few scratches. There's the marks from whoever worked on it. I don't know if it was a mechanic or a DIY guy. Hopefully a DIY guy, because I can excuse that, kind of. Caps, intake doesn't look too bad, but when you get to the exhaust, that's pretty chewed up. That's not great. That was a little bit better. These aren't terrible. It's not like it had a ton of debris run through it or it was starved of oil for a very long time. Before we get the head bolts out, I need to get that bolt. It's, I think, the only external Torx bolt on the engine. I don't know why that was the tooling of choice, but it's a Ford. So I really have no idea what size this is. It looks like an E9, which is why we're going to hammer a 6mm metric socket onto it. Oh no, my hammer broke! If this doesn't work, it should have. Oh, it's not going to work. I need more hammer force here. Uh-oh. We have things that happen that I don't like. Why is that a what here? Alright, let's get a bigger hammer. It started to move. Alright, so that doesn't fit. Let's find something a little smaller. We're going to bring it down a notch with a 5.5. That's a Ford size. Uh-oh, this may not work. I don't have a good feeling about this. No. Why is this like this? Oh, we have an E8 on it now, which is not right. No, this is we're gonna have to take some other measures here. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use my long punch, try to deform the head so that I can put a different socket on it. We're gonna try a 5.5. I don't have a lot of faith in that. I'm gonna go down to a 5, but we're gonna use one of those soft sockets from my local drugstore. That's not gonna work. We'll have to get it off another way. This is quite possibly the dumbest part of this engine so far. I just want to shear it off. That's all I want to do here. Just like that. Let's see, is this part of the bolt? There we are. I think we're good. All right, now it's time to crack the head bolts loose so we can pull the cylinder head. All right, now let's see if we can get this head off pretty easily, right? Oh wait, I'm forgetting one thing. Before I start, I need to get the this loop for the fuel hose off. We just need to get it off one side. Or apparently both sides. There we are. Okay, now I think we can pull the head. Well, what have we here? A head gasket. Well, let's get the rest of this bolt out. This is the one I had to chisel the head off of. Still not quite sure why they used that tooling, but it is a Ford. They want you to use the entire toolbox you got. Head gasket seems to be in pretty good shape. First, we must do our test. Ooh, that sounded bad. I don't know. Maybe it's fine. Oh, that one's bad. You could hear it. Okay then, that was fun. Do you remember what I told you about first glances? It doesn't look bad. Some vertical wear, lots of debris from when I pulled the cylinder head. You can see there's a couple of marks there. But I don't see any signs that the pistons made contact with the cylinder head, so that's good. Cylinder head looks pretty good as well. I don't see any notable cracks or damage. Looks pretty solid to me. Next, we'll cram the caps off of this side. Uh-oh. Everything's in a bind. This is how you fix it. That's how I thought you fixed it. What have I done? For the record, I took this apart at TDC, so... Well, the journals in the head look maybe a little worse than the other side. They're not terrible. Again, all the valve train looks to be intact and where it's supposed to be. That one's pretty scored up there. So they're not great. I think they're totally workable though. Some of the rockers have a little bit of damage on the rollers, but nothing terrible. The camshafts have some minor wear, aside from where someone used a pipe wrench. The journals have some wear as well, on the cam caps anyway. That one's pretty grooved up, but some of them are nice. It's not like it wiped all of them out. It's the housing for the high pressure fuel pump, integral cam caps. Looks decent. There's the lobe for the high pressure fuel pump. Those marks. Not terrible. All right, we have a couple things to do before we get the head bolts out. It's way easier when it's a normal tool. And because of the location of the cam sensors, they kind of interfere with getting the head bolts out, so I'm going to go ahead and remove them. Now we can get these head bolts out. And head number 2. Well, that head gasket looks good too. I don't see anything too bad, but we must do our test. Everything seems to be pretty good. Huh. There's quite a bit of carbon in here, and you can see there's some decent vertical wear halfway down the bore, as well as this side. You can definitely see that something's going on there. We can't really take a look at that bore at this time, but I'm sure we will later. Look at all that debris. But I don't see any marks on the pistons from hitting the head, which is surprising. Cylinder head looks pretty good too. I don't see any issues whatsoever. Looks clean. Next, let's get this oil filter off the oil filter housing. Now we're leaking some oil. It didn't really look super clean. Got kind of a watery texture. I wonder if that 0W0 stuff they're running in the late models cars. I'm going to let this drain and we'll cut this open before the end of the video. So before I drain this, I wanted to show you guys the sparkles that are in this filter. This filter became a bearing sluice box to catch all the material. Next, I'm going to remove the oil cooler. Normally I take this off with the oil filter housing, but the cooler blocks the bolts. And now we'll get the oil filter housing off. This should just pull off, right? Right. Now we're going to roll this thing upside down so we can pull the oil pan. That's coolant. That's a leaf. That's oil. That's, I don't know what fluid that is. Perfect. Now we can pull the oil pan. We're going to start with the two 8mm at the back. Not starting in the back. I am pretty glad to see that this is aluminum. I wish there was a way to get all the bolts out at once. Achoo! There we go. Our old blue here should make short work of this oil pan. Plus they leave you a place to pry. Whoa. There's stuff in there. It's not supposed to be, but there is. Well, that's bad. There's actually some pretty good sized chunks in here. We've got large bearing segments and lots of finely powdered bearings. It's a nice good piece right there. I see all kinds of bearings. It's like the bearing C. It's very pasty. Even a sliver in the pickup. It's still good. Anytime that I get into an engine that's been into before and I see excess sealant, I always fear that the pickup is going to be clogged of RTV or some kind of sealant. But I don't see that in this case. I think the fact that this piece of metal was in there was something that just happened because it had oil in it, at least enough to suck this into the pickup. Next, we'll pull the pickup tube. I feel like this pickup is holding some secrets. Or bearings. It's a lot. Is that it? Nope, there's more. That might be it. Do you remember the statement I made just a minute ago? That's RTV. That's not good. Now, I don't know if that's enough to clog the whole thing or cause a problem, but that's certainly not good. There's a few other pieces of it in here. Of course, lots of bearing flakes. These are just plated bearings. They're not very valuable. Next stop, the oil pump. I think that's it. Let's take this one out too. Well, that one wasn't even tight. That bolt is bent. Someone's been in here. Wait a minute. What? 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 We have problems in here. What? Well, more on that. Let's go look at the oil pump first. Let's get this oil pump apart. You can see it has some damage to the outside of this housing here. What? It's a smaller size, but why? Ford things. Nope. I think Ford's motto is you paid for the whole toolbox, you're going to use the whole toolbox. Did I get them all? I sure think so. Ah, look, extreme wear here. Shim looks okay. Vane style pump, much like a transmission. Will this come apart easy? Oh yeah. Let's just dump all the pieces and parts. I'm gonna go ahead and clean all this up so we can take a better look at it. Well, it's clear, lots of damage to that housing. I know it's hard to see, but the outer edges of this are also damaged, as you would expect. All the vanes have pretty normal wear, maybe a little more than normal. And the housing, again, really not great. Lots of wear towards the outside. Back to this. I have no words. I did not expect that at all. When I hit this bolt with the impact to get that off, I thought that moved a little bit. But that's a little more than a little bit. Let's get this girdle off so we can see what happened here. Okay. That checks out. Well, it's pretty easy to see the failure here. But why did that happen? How did that happen? I am so impressed. It's amazing. I suppose it's time to start pulling the rods and pistons to see if we can turn this over. This turns over, right? Yeah, see, it's fine. There's nothing wrong here. Oh, hey. Hey, that's kind of neat. That's impressive. All right, now we're going to crack those bolts loose, and we'll work our way from front to back, the clean way. Let's see how hard it is for this to come out. It came right out. All right, we're going to turn this over very carefully. No, we're not going to do that. We'll go this way. It's just a loose fit, that's all it is. Let's go to the middle two cylinders. Final two cylinders. Let's see which way we can go here. Perfect. That one does not want to come out. There we go. Final rod and piston. Now we can tackle the main cap bolts. I want to crack these loose by hand to see if they sound different because of the broken crank. Wait a second. Okay, let's start with the first main cap. So that's not good. Let's flip it out of there. Wow. Spun the main bearing. Let's pull the first crankshaft out. Wow, that's like a piece of artwork right there. Get the rest of these out. Don't anticipate anything too crazy. And the final main cap. Now I need to remove this rear main seal plate. It's kind of close to this engine stand, so I might have to come up with the crank, which is fine. Yeah, this might not work. It's fine. What if we just slightly modify it? Yeah, that'll work, I think. All right, let's pull this secondary crankshaft. Let's start out with those rod bearings. Bottom shell doesn't look terrible. Top shell has some wear. Those look pretty good as well. Nothing really standing out, especially for, you know, the amount of metal we found on the VVT solenoids. I expected more than this. Ah, there we go. There's a little bit of wear. That's cylinder 6, final cylinder. Now the rods and pistons. So this rod has been self-clearance. With a broken crankshaft, this thing was likely rotating back and forth in the bore, making contact with the remnants of the crankshaft. And one thing to note is you can see these rings are freed up. Well, this actually, the secondary ring it's stuck. Pistons don't look terrible, but every single one of these has a collapsed secondary compression ring. The second compression ring is stuck in the ringland, probably from carbon. I would not say overheat. I would say it's likely from carbon. Number one ring moves freely. Look at the amount of carbon and junk on these pistons. Now, I don't know what to do to avoid this. It's maybe a catch can, maybe better fuel. But either way, that's pretty telling. I bet this thing was burning oil, smoking, or at least misfiring. It had to run terrible. I mean, broken crankshaft aside. These are just, they're all stuck in the ringland. The land of the rings. Now the best part. The two-piece crankshaft. You know, Ford's really big on modular engines, but I don't think they wanted to carry it this far. Look at that. It just broke. That is insane. We've seen some pretty crazy failures on this channel lately. That's how I like to keep it. But the journals are nice. I think they'd polish right out. You know, kind of a moot point at this point. But if you go back to this main journal, that one's pretty chewed up. And if you go to the main bearings, this one was spun. And I can't tell you if this spun and then it decided to break the crankshaft, or if the broken crankshaft caused this to spin. It's kind of what came first, the chicken or the egg. These were definitely spun in the main cap. The rest of the main bearings don't look terrible. This first main cap, it definitely has some damage. The rest of them look pretty normal. And if you look at the edge of the counterbalance on the broken piece of the crank, that's from making contact with the piston and the main cap, or actually the rod. Now the oil filter, look at the silver slag in that. It is laden with sparkles. For very forbidden glitter. I mean, look at that paste. That's my glove after handling that filter. And the main journal on the block definitely has some damage. I'm not going to say that this wouldn't clean up, but I don't think the amount of machine work that this block would need to be right makes it worth it. Wow. Let's take a look at these bores. Some pretty good wear in there. Not terrible. I mean, I think this would clean up just fine. A little bit of damage to that one. Some vertical scratches. Oh, that one's much worse. Yeah, that's pretty bad. And this is the bore on the front crankshaft. You can see it's got quite a lot of wear in the middle of the bore. A lot of vertical scratches. It's pretty worn out. Not so bad on the other two cylinders. Not too good either. Wow. Well, I did not expect that, and I have a few theories as to how this happened. First, I'd like to mention that I don't believe all of the problems we found with this engine were related. I think whoever went in there to replace the timing guides, maybe the timing chain, and used channel locks or a pipe wrench on the camshafts, that situation, while not great craftsmanship, was not what caused the demise of this engine. I think that was totally unrelated. However, the fact that every single second compression ring was stuck in the ringland is kind of telling. So obviously when that happens, it runs rough, it has low compression, it can misfire. And if you have a flaw, a factory flaw in a crankshaft, when you find out that flaw exists is usually from some abnormal situation. And when an engine is misfiring, it's vibrating, has some weird harmonics, either a torque converter goes bad, a flex plate goes bad, there has to be some type of catalyst to making that flaw apparent. And I think that's what could have happened here, and it's just a guess, is that if this thing was running rough and misfiring, the plugs didn't look that great, then those weird vibrations could have caused this crankshaft to break. Although that would never happen if there wasn't some sort of flaw in the metal of the crankshaft. Just because your car misfires doesn't mean you're going to break a crankshaft. That's not how that works. I have seen crankshafts break from usually extenuating circumstances. You suck in water, like I said, a bad torque converter, a broken flex plate. Something creates the problem. I didn't see any signs of hydrolock in this engine. There was no rust in this engine. None of the rods were bent. I'd like to think that those would bend before the crankshaft would break. But in this case, the crankshaft snapped in half. Now, I searched the internets, which that's where all the truth lies, for other people that had broken cranks in a 3.5 Ecoboost. And I found a couple, but not a lot. It doesn't seem like it's a super common failure compared to the phaser problem and all the other issues you hear with these engines. I think this might just be a bad run of crankshafts. And it's a guess. Of course, it's always a guess. I'm not a mechanic. I'm not a technician. I don't repair cars every day. I just take them apart. So this engine has some good parts on it. I am pretty happy with some of the parts that survived. The cylinder heads, hopefully those are worth some money. They didn't look that bad. And then the oil pan, which in my experience, Ford oil pans aren't worth anything. And that's maybe not as good as I thought. I didn't pay a lot for this core. It was a few $100, and I think it was worth the video. I really hope you enjoyed this teardown. If you'd like to buy any parts out of this engine, either for your desk, you want the nose of the crank, which I can only sell once, or anything else out of it, or anything else out of the engines I've torn down in the past, or parts out of this 85,000 mile Civic Si and EP3. It's wrecked really hard. I'm going to leave our email in the video description. You can also go to Importapart.com and peruse our inventory. I've been uploading our parts cars every single week. As always, I love all the comments, all the feedback, and even the criticism. I love it all, and I'll catch you on the next one.